All statements and opinions expressed by guests of the Adult in the Room podcast are strictly their own and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs or opinions of the host, producers, or advertisers. All interviews are presented in their most complete possible form in the interests of free speech. No statements should be interpreted as financial, legal, or medical advice. Listener and viewer discretion are strongly advised.
It's the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. That's me. Welcome to the Adult in the Room podcast with Victoria Taft. Please subscribe and all that, share. There's so much to share on this program. Honestly, some of the best guests ever, and in-depth conversations with people you care about. And welcome once again to J. Michael Waller. Thank you so much for coming back.
It is great to be back.
Oh my gosh. He has written probably the most important book in the Trump administration, Big Intel, subtitle, How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. My aunt just got the book, and she's all over this stuff. Her eyeballs are just, popping out. Well, the reason I wanted to have you on was because I wondered, to the extent you've had contact with the Trump administration and they just took your entire DEI and FBI chapters out of the book and just ripped them out and said, okay, guys, do this.
Well, it's exciting to see that they see pretty much along the same lines. They see the same problems. They see very similar solutions. In 2018, I had recommended that the Trump administration then freeze all of AID's spending and purge its personnel. They didn't take the advice then, but they are doing, even better than I was hoping for this time.
Isn't this something? Well, let's talk about all of it. The top line issue right now, as we talk and record on it on this day, is this amazing font of information about USAID. And tell me about this organization. Tell me what they're doing. And would it be any surprise to you to learn that, in fact, they produced the document upon which efforts to get regime change in the United States against Donald Trump were based?
Well, none of it would be surprising.
Not to you.
No, yeah, well... Well, full disclosure, I had been a subcontractor with USAID in the late 1980s as part of an effort to overthrow a communist government in Nicaragua. And so I think that was money properly spent. And then I was a subcontractor in Russia in the mid 90s to take an axe to the KGB, which was grappling to retake power in Russia. And that's a different story, but we can talk about that later. But
it's fascinating.
Yeah. So President Kennedy founded USAID in 1961 as part of the gray area conflict of the Cold War, where he recognized, if you read his speeches, he was always warning about communist subversion. Throughout his whole Senate career, and even in his presidency speeches, even the day he was shot in Dallas, his prepared speech, he had a comment warning again against subversion. So he thought, how can we fight this communist subversion worldwide and keep it at bay and keep communism contained? And part of that was U.S. Agency for International Development, which his brother-in-law, Sergeant Shriver, headed up. And that was to start.
This is the one he headed up. Holy moly. Okay.
So the purpose was to provide humanitarian emergency aid and relief, but most of all, development assistance to help people, pull themselves up by their bootstraps and starting with clean water and more efficient farming and good roads all the way up to, progressing until they could be self-sufficient. That was the purpose of it. And it served a great purpose, first as a humanitarian thing, but also just as a cold realism instrument of how we're going to combat communism without hurting anybody. So it was really important up until about toward the end of the Cold War, when people in there were trying to repurpose USAID to become really a money-making operation and a political warfare machine for themselves.
A money-making operation? To what extent would that be true? How did they do that?
Well, you have your regular staff who are government employees, and then you have contractors who provide different expertise. So you don't need someone with a certain specialized knowledge set or skill set on a full-time payroll. So it's more efficient to hire them out for a day or a week or even a year just as a contractor. It saves the taxpayers money, and so forth. So it made sense. But what happened over time was it became what they call in Washington, a self-licking ice cream cone, where a Beltway bandits within the Washington Beltway were setting up companies to become permanent contractors. And these went from beyond your $500 a day contractor to your $1 billion a year contracting company. And it just became a self-sustaining mechanism to promote whatever they wanted to. And this was a community of like-minded political people who had social agendas. They ended up waging social revolution in these countries that they were supposed to be helping. And there was no oversight ever from Congress. The last oversight hearing of USAID was in 2011, a one-day hearing. They were looking for fraud. But in that 64-year history...
One-day hearing.
Yeah, one-day hearing. See, one day...
Yeah, they could have found a lot in that one day, it seems to me, but knowing what we do now.
Well, the Inspector General just lied to Congress about it. But to his credit, Congressman Jeff Chapis was the one who held the hearing, and it was about fraud. But a one-day hearing in 61 years. So any bureaucracy, anybody's going to do what they want to do without any oversight. If you keep throwing money at it to help the poor, the children, and all that, they're really helping themselves.
Yeah, it's got aid in the title and the acronym, so therefore it must be helpful to people, poor people, and young things and furry kittens.
And that's what makes it so untouchable. It's like education. It's for the children. So you have these rich union leaders, NEA and so forth, screaming and shrieking and pounding their fists about how it's going to hurt the children when it's not going to hurt the children at all to return education back to the states and towns. But it's going to hurt them. So similar thing you have with USAID.
So what did you do with USAID again? I mean, like nuts and bolts, like on any given day, like when you, for instance, were in Nicaragua and they sent you down there. This is when if you go back to our first interview with J. Michael Waller on his book, Big Intel, what you'll find is a sort of a discussion about how he came to be a part of this whole thing. I assume that's what you were doing at that time, the USAID stuff.
Well, first I went down on my own as a student journalist. I was still an undergraduate, and then I was doing work, intelligence collection for the CIA.
Okay.
For CIA Director Bill Casey, but I wasn't an agent or employee. I was just doing it for them. I was an asset. And then years went by. I was on my own, had no other contact with the CIA, but I was continuing to work with the Contras on my own to help them overthrow the communists in Nicaragua. And but then when President George Bush the first shut them down, he basically stabbed them in the back, forced them to demobilize and to disarm unilaterally. So USAID went in to say, well, these guys have been in the mountains for years. Let's teach them skills so they can become productive in society, and let's do political organizing, show them how to do political organizing so they can set up their own political parties and compete in a democratic process. So I was down there to train them in communication and political organization, how to give speeches in towns, how to present yourself, how to make arguments, how to organize people. But I was also on the side telling them, don't disarm, pack your weapons in grease and bury them because they're going to come and kill you if you disarm.
Yes. Wow. So at USAID, you were sort of working contra to what they wanted you to do. And the CIA and all the U.S. government pulls the plug on the Contras. You're going down there under the auspices of USAID, and then all of a sudden you're not doing what they want you to do. So
well, they didn't know that part, so I was fine with them.
I'm sure they didn't know that part.
You see, a lot of people were my friends. I'd known them over the years.
Sure.
So these were the commanders and the sub-commanders. And of 88 commanders and sub-commanders I trained on the USAID contract, 44 of them were assassinated.
Holy crap. Wow. Tell me something. Now that we know, in retrospect, and of course, we want to go back and sort of unpack a lot of this stuff with you because it's important. If you know the nuts and bolts of what a person was doing for USAID or any of the intelligence agencies, of which I count USAID according to it's a CIA cutout. Am I right? Right? That's what it is.
First, you never know what's a CIA cutout and what's not. If it is a CIA cutout, it's a lot of people have committed a lot of felonies over the years because the law specifically prohibits funds that are going to the State Department USAID budget from being used for intelligence purposes ever. So, and you need a presidential finding, which is the term. The president has to specifically direct a covert operation. And you haven't had, we know for a fact that Trump never directed USAID to run left-wing covert operations abroad. So you know that the president doesn't control this. So it becomes a state within a state. Now, it has partnered with CIA on things just like it's partnered with our diplomats and with our military in different countries where there are operations going on. However, I'm arguing, so you've got, say, Mike Benz out there. He uncovered so much of this to begin with. He says it's a CIA front. I disagree with him on that based on my own experiences with them, that it's not a front, but when you get like-minded people, they will partner together. So in that sense, the USAID has became a giant slush fund with thousands of employees and many thousands more contractors with billions of unaccountable dollars to spend. And they're doing their own social revolutions with a wink and a nod from the Obama White House, and then on their own under Trump, and then from the Biden White House. But they didn't need to be a CIA instrument because they had capabilities that the CIA did not have in terms of recruiting and training and organizing political operatives and movements all around the world.
Sure. Mike Benz also says he's a former governmental official, U.S. State Department official, lawyer, and now works on information and non-censorship and that sort of thing, anti-censorship organization. And but what he says is if it's too dirty for the CIA, USAID will do it. Yes?
Yeah. He has a kind of a poetic way of saying things, a colorful way of saying things, and it's really catchy. I think you have to simplify it because government stuff is so complex. You have to boil it down. So I understand what he means by it, but it's really, the CIA does its things, USAID does its things. They overlap just because it's part of their natural work in, say, promoting democracy, right? The CIA doesn't do so much of that anymore because it doesn't need to, because there's USAID that does that. So literally, USAID has taken on what had been covert intelligence functions and does them overtly or semi-overtly.
Right. I think that's one of the reasons why they said they had or Benz talks about how there's the outward facing part of the U.S. government to CIA. And then there's and USAID to some extent, obviously. And then there's the inward facing thing. And that's also something that he talks about, in the use of those government instruments to now go from regime change and other things that they were doing outside to looking inside and now capturing American citizens in investigations and intelligence operations that we're doing on the inside. And I guess what Benz is basically saying is that the CIA was told it couldn't do that anymore, obviously from the 1970s Church Commission and committee and all sorts of things. And then the Jimmy Carter comes in as a result, but so what they were doing is that they said, "Hey, okay, USAID, you can do this." Is that right?
Actually, it began under Reagan, and it began under Reagan for a different reason because Carter had destroyed the CIA's clandestine service, and because the CIA was answerable to the president. I mean, under the law. In practice, it was maybe a bit different, but under the law, it was answerable to the president, and he had to issue a finding for it. But under Reagan, with the end of the Cold War coming and the impending collapse of the Soviet Union, it was a matter of how do we push this thing over faster, and then help it so that because the only organized groups in these countries were the communist parties. So how can we help organize anti-communists in those countries, left, right, and center, but still how can we help them organize parties, train them, provide them with all the political skills and some funding, as well as free press, alternative media, and those kinds of things to undermine the communists of the Soviet bloc. It was a great plan. But if you have the CIA handing out money in say the Soviet Union, even under Gorbachev, if opposition people were taking money from the CIA, they could be legitimately arrested in their countries as spies. But if they were taking humanitarian aid openly from USAID, they could not. And they had some kind of diplomatic protection and sort of international political protection. So that was the idea. So USAID would fund the International Republican Institute, which was new under Reagan, and the National Democratic Institute, its counterpart under Reagan, under a rubric called the National Endowment for Democracy, which was mainly funded by AID, but got other money. So they were doing overtly liberal and conservative and moderate organization of their sort of political brethren in these other countries. So it was all above board, and it was all coming from a State Department USAID budget, not from a secret intelligence budget. And the communists really couldn't fight that, and it worked. It was successful. But that's where the social revolutionary, mafia was coming up, when people were starting to make a ton of money off this. And they kept it that way.
Just to camp there for a minute, the organizations that you were just talking about, of which there was a Republican and Democrat separate board to entice people from Congress and the Senate. But that Hunter Biden was on the Democratic side, wasn't he? Wasn't he part and parcel of that organization that was basically sort of run by a bunch of CIA guys?
Yeah, I'm not clear on that. I mean, he might have been. I just didn't follow him. But certainly Hillary Clinton and her cronies were very active in this, and they were doing it for a different reason. I was a reporter at the time, and I went to a UN international conference in Cairo. It was on population and women's health. It was really an international abortion conference. And President Mubarak was there of Egypt, and all these other leaders were there. And I got to have a long conversation with Secretary of State Madeleine Albright at the time. And she was very frank that in private, and it was off the record, but she's deceased now, so I'm not breaking my word. But she said flat out, yeah, we're here to promote, women's health abroad, and even in these backward, AKA Muslim societies that don't allow abortion. And so she was saying flat out right there to in Egypt that this was they had a purpose to undermine traditional values of these different societies, and that was part of their goal back then. Now, this was right after the Cold War, when even congressmen and senators used to want to be on the foreign relations committees as one of the most prestigious committees in Congress. That and the judiciary, they were the most sought after. But by the collapse of the Soviet Empire, a lot of congressmen didn't want to be on it. So it was the Clinton administration that was telling its loyalists, get on these committees and you can use this to bring money back to your districts. And we'll use foreign aid to bring it back to your own constituencies and your own groups. And you can build up your own political base out of that. So that's how the real corruption of foreign aid really germinated.
Wow. So it is a conduit for Democrat money.
Oh, sure. I mean, if you look at the faces of those congressmen who a week ago were protesting in front of USAID shut down, almost all of them represented the Beltway bandit districts. They were almost all suburban Washington, D.C. senators and congressmen. So Virginia, Maryland, and the local counties ringing Washington, D.C., because they were representing billions and tens of billions of dollars in Beltway bandit money from these groups. And in fact, Senator Van Hollen, who was there of Maryland, he sits on 2 Senate committees or subcommittees that have control of AID money. One of them is to appropriate the money, and the other one is to supervise what's done with the money. And he has tens of billions of dollars of that money go right into his state.
So we're depending upon Chris Hollen, the Democrat from Maryland, to determine how that money is spent? That's madness.
Yeah, and then
he's not even in the majority.
No, well, he's ranking Democrat on the subcommittee now, but when they were in the majority, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Ben Cardin, was also from Maryland, and he was the chairman of the full committee, so he could dictate where this money went and make sure it was always funded, especially under Biden. And the Republicans were basically looking the other way. They just never really did much.
Didn't want to pick that fight, did they?
Didn't want to pick a lot of fights.
Guess who's picking fights for him now?
Yeah, we need that fighter. Yeah. So, and boy, is he picking these fights. I mean, can you imagine, of all the places to start, USAID why are so many people in Congress getting so upset about this? And in the media, well, we're finding out now they were getting millions and millions and millions of dollars a year from USAID for money that was designed to help poor people abroad. So you have Politico being subsidized by USAID, you have the New York Times being subsidized, all these other media outlets being subsidized by them, in addition to, it's not it's not just campaign contributions that these big companies are giving. It's employing family members of lawmakers, employing children of their donors, putting their donors on the board, helping their donors set up their own companies to do contracting. And then you can pay yourself $300,000 or $400,000 a year as CEO. USAID won't bat an eye, plus benefits. And then you mark it up 10% for expenses. And if you're a for-profit company, you get that 10% markup. So if you get a $50 million a year contract, you're making $5.5 million a year helping the poor.
That's happening right now. I mean,
well, not now, not as of Monday.
Yeah. I'm sorry to laugh. Samantha Power, the now former head of USAID.
Oh, she looked like Gollum. Did you see her?
Oh, yeah, I did. It's like, what? This woman, she just never goes away. She's just always ever present, from not just, from the Obama administration, from Hillary Clinton's confab. I mean, they're all part and parcel of the same things. It's
part of this globalist social revolution. So what they've done is they have taken the idea of Marxism, meaning the poor, proletarian masses against the rich, terrible few bourgeoisie, and they've stood it on its head. So the revolution is not about helping poor people to take the means of production. It is a social revolution to destroy all of Western culture. And that's what USA has been doing.
And they've done it throughout the entire time. I understand from, just going over your book again, it's not necessarily USAID doing this, but our intelligence agencies were dyed-in-the-wool critical Marxists, critical theory people selling that stuff, which of course was, as you talk about in your book, Big Intel, an active measures campaign from the Kremlin from way back. And so here we are, here we are doing the same thing through USAID. Maybe they're doing the jobs that the CIA won't do anymore. Who knows? Maybe you have an opinion about that. But trying to undermine not just the family, but God, trying to undermine the very basis of Western civilizational Judeo-Christian underpinnings of civilization. It's just, it really is, it's stunning.
That's the whole idea. Karl Marx wrote about this before he even wrote the Communist Manifesto. Destroy everything. Question everything. Criticize everything relentlessly. That's what the critical means in critical theory. To criticize everything, not to fix it, but to undermine everyone's confidence and to destroy it. So that's what FBI and CIA, especially the CIA, have been doing. I wrote about that in Big Intel. And that's what USAID has been doing and the State Department has been doing. And not just in America. The Canadian Secret Services and the Canadian aid organizations are doing that. The British ones are. In fact, the British Secret Service is more woke than ours are. Even the Israelis are. That's why they were looking at Hamas and Hezbollah, at the moderate elements, and, we can pay them to leave us alone. Not bothering to try to understand the enemy like the hard-nosed Israelis had long done. Saying, no, they want to wipe us out. And so they got October 7th.
You talk about in Big Intel, first of all, you talk about the history of all of that. You set the stage to explain why this current DEI stuff and all that, of course, that's been shit canned, but the rest of it, excuse my language, sort of. And but they're talking, but you set the stage so well. And for people like me, I just never had put all the pieces together. So I advise people to get the book, go get this book, Big Intel, and then listen to our first conversation, with, J. Michael Waller. Okay. So here we have, why are they, what's the objective of doing all of that in the breakdown of the family? Aside from, well, we're going to criticize everything. Isn't it it's a battle of good and evil, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it really is, especially when you have people like Saul Alinsky, who these people follow. He dedicated Rules for Radicals to Lucifer. So some of them don't even bother to hide it. But you see, they infiltrate institutions and subvert them and take them over from within. They take one of the Soviets' first targets in the United States was to target the seminaries. And in the 1930s, they inserted over 1,000 Soviet-controlled agents into American seminaries to take over the churches. So if you're in your early 20s going through seminary, starting in the 1920s, that means through the 1960s now, you're 40 years later, you're a senior, you're a bishop, or you're a senior pastor, or whatever else, having gone through this as a trained Soviet agent. Think of all the other people you've trained. And think of people who were not witting, bad people at all. They were just influenced by what you said and thought and believed in what you thought. And then look how religion has been twisted and warped. And so how much of the Catholic Church and so many Protestant denominations have really become Marxist.
Absolutely. The Sojourners and all of these different groups that are sort of para-church organizations that teach nothing less than Marxism, seen through a prism of, oh, Jesus is in there somewhere, everybody. It's going to be fine. And I kind of wonder if this also plays into why it is that someone the likes of Ilhan Omar can exist in a Muslim community when the Muslims don't buy this crap. What's going on?
Well, a lot of them do, and a lot of them don't. And even if you don't, as a younger person, grandma and grandpa still live in your house. And they came over as part of the chain migration from these countries. So they brought their jihadist fundamentalist beliefs with them. Or in the case of Ilhan Omar, she was raised in a family that with a very weird ideology. They were completely ideological. Her father was what they called a trainer. That's sort of a community organizer trainer for the dictator Mohammed Siad Barre in Somalia. Now, Siad Barre combined Islamism with Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, and Mussolini's fascism for his own regime ideology. And Ilhan Omar's dad was one of the trainers for this out in the hinterlands of the country. He raised her this way. So it's no surprise that she would think this way as a member of Congress. The thing is, why would we as a society be admitting these people into our country when you have to take an oath of allegiance and abjure all of your loyalties to other foreign potentates and regimes? So they really took false oaths to emigrate here. Now, when she was a child, but her parents took those oaths for her. But this is part of the whole naturalization process where we don't pay attention to it anymore. So we let hostile, foreign, malicious elements into our country who came here for the purpose of overthrowing our system.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you can imagine the USAID program that conjured up this news story paper and then subsequent news stories? This is total information operation. And then Eric Charamella, who's still in the White House, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, who's a CIA guy in the White House during the Trump administration, a holdover from the Obama administration, can yet then seize upon this conjured up fake information in order so that the impeachments of Donald Trump can take place. What do you know about this?
I don't know the details on that one, but this was one of the huge mistakes that President Trump made in his earlier administration, which he acknowledges now, which was to bring in career intelligence people or to keep the ones that were sitting there on the National Security Council and detailed to the White House. So when you're in another agency, the White House needs expertise, especially on the National Security Council. They're not necessarily hired on the White House staff. They're merely transferred from their agency, whether it's Agriculture Department or the CIA. So they're still paid by those old agencies. So he was still a CIA person, to my knowledge, in the White House. Well, this time around, one of the first things that National Security Advisor Mike Waltz did when he came in was he said that all the career people should simply stay home and do nothing until receiving further orders. That kept them out of the executive office of the president. That broke any possibility of another Ciaramella incident. And then it allows him as national security advisor to pick and choose who are the real professionals that we need, who are going to do their jobs, and who are the dangerous elements who should be thrown out.
Yeah. Now, I know that they, at the White House level, they have these interagency committees in huge places where they liaise with other organizations for a common purpose, I gather. I don't even know what the purpose is except to swap notes and see what's going on in the world. Do you see these as a force for good, or should we be concerned about those?
It depends. It depends on who's running them. And you could have a strong personality who's loyal to the president and maintains the agenda. But you could have a beta type personality who's also loyal to the president, but feels uncertain because he doesn't really know his place and thinks, well, these intelligence people know more than I do, so I'll kind of defer to them and let them run the meeting, and I'll just say something now and then to sound important. So you have that too. You have that in any kind of group. And then you have, but you have to have these policy meetings, because if you're going to, let's say the president's going to make a pronouncement on something and he's decided to do it, you need to know, well, what does this mean diplomatically? So we need the State Department people coming in, including the actual desk officers who would handle this. You need the CIA people coming in. You'd need people from other intelligence communities coming in, or at least their representatives or their assessments of what's going on. And well, how will this affect trade? So you might need somebody from Treasury or Commerce to come in. So that's what they call interagency meetings, to figure out, okay, well, which agency is going to handle which, or they might say, like Trump does, to hell with all of you, I'm just going to buy Gaza and make it part of the United States. I mean, you get pronouncements like that. So Trump
was that just the best? I mean,
like what?
Was that just the best?
And did you see Netanyahu? What did he just say?
Netanyahu was laughing. I mean, he's got this smirk on his face going, I don't know what the hell this guy's doing, but I'm going with him. Because I know he's my friend.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
I know.
like
We're going to put big hotels up there. I'm sorry, Bigford. What'd you say?
No, it doesn't look like Netanyahu knew in advance that Trump was going to say that. So it's pretty clear there was no interagency thing, because on such an interagency meeting, you think, well, what would the Israelis say to this? It matters, It's like Trump it's going to be a big, beautiful place on the Mediterranean. It's going to be the most beautiful place. And all these 1.7 million Palestinians are going to have big, beautiful, modern homes somewhere else.
The Riviera of the Middle East. Oh my God. I'm sorry. Keith and my husband and I were just laughing. We were like, just hold on. Don't say anything. This is like historical going on right now. Yeah. This whole thing was just unbelievable. And I go, what's the end game here? I know this isn't what he means. So, you wait a couple of days and find out.
Who knows?
It's a negotiating ploy, of course. But
yeah. And so everyone who wants to understand Trump has to read The Art of the Deal, and then things won't be quite so shocking. But think of it this way too. Diplomats, military strategists, intelligence people, they are trained in traditional geostrategy, geopolitics, geostrategy. What does every point, every sea line of communication, every other land, what do they all mean to us strategically? Trump's looking at the world as a big thinking real estate developer would.
And it's like, hey, it's good for everybody. Come on now.
He thought he was doing big stuff just in New York and Vegas and everything. And now he's thinking, wait, we got the Panama Canal, we've got Greenland, and nobody ever dared thinking about Greenland in any different way before. It's run by our allies, the Danes. But if you look at the Danish defense industry, they just boosted their defense budget last December for added defense of Greenland, and they added. It literally in their defense budget, they added 2 more dog sledding teams.
What? Is that something we need over there? Is that the deal?
Dog sledding, because you run out of gas if you're going in snowmobiles, and you've got to patrol a lot of area. But I mean, the Danes can't defend Greenland. China has its eyes on Greenland, and with only 50-odd thousand people, Greenland would be an easy place for a place like China to come in and just bribe people and take it over, or creep its way in through contracts. There's so much mineral and everything else. So Trump was just saying, Greenland's a great piece of real estate. There's an autonomy movement going on in Greenland that the Danes are respecting. There's going to be some kind of a plebiscite, maybe even for independence. Let's make Greenland part of America. Right after calling the socialist prime minister of Canada, Governor Trudeau, governor of the 51st state, and then going to Panama saying we're going to invade and take back our canal. Well, you see, Panama just flipped. What was that all about? That was because Panama had agreed to be part of Communist China's Belt and
Road Initiative. Yes, sir.
China's control of the canal, which we've been warning for 25 years at the Center for Security Policy. But so Trump went, everyone was shocked, horrified. And then what did Panama do? Just yesterday, they pulled out of the Belt and Road Agreement with China.
Guess what? He got what he wanted out of it. Notwithstanding the fact that that was probably the main thing. The other main thing there is not too far away from the Panama Canal is the Darien Gap, which is where all of the bad actors from the Middle East are coming over through Brazil, getting their visas, coming up through the Darien Gap and coming in the United States of America. And that's where a lot of my understanding is the Al-Qaeda people and all sorts of other bad actors are coming in because they have these visas. And that's what they're doing. We have cells all over the United States right now. Because Joe Biden left the freaking door open.
Here's how and USAID was funding a lot of this. This is the other weird thing. And the Department of Homeland Security, which they haven't yet gotten a bust into yet. Homeland Security paid to build those camps at the Darien Gap for these illegals. So you had somebody flying chartered flights out of Mauritania and Mali and all these North African countries, flying them to Ankara, Turkey, with flights either straight to Panama to come up illegally by land, or to Ecuador, where they'd come up through the Darien Gap, through Colombia, and then to the Darien Gap into Panama. And then direct flights from China to Ecuador, because Ecuador didn't require Chinese citizens to have visas. So they're coming into Ecuador, marching straight through the Darien Gap. And that's how we have the equivalent of 6 army divisions of Chinese military-age men who came over here illegally. That's the way they came. So anyway, Panama's shutting that down. The funding for those camps have been shut down. Other countries are working with us. And then look how tough Trump got with the president of Mexico. She's a hardcore socialist left-winger. She hates our guts. But what did she do after yelling and screaming for a couple of days? She's got 20,000 of her own troops up on the border, and they're going to help us to kill the cartel leaders.
There's a gal I keep track of, former CIA targeter, and she's keeps her eye on it. It's all open source information. She doesn't have necessarily, unless she can get a hold of one of her folks that are still over in the sandbox, where she can get some first person information. She's following the money, and part of the money that is being sent to pay for Al-Qaeda training camps, the Taliban, now being run by bin Laden family members who have now connected themselves through marriage with Mullah Omar's family. We are paying 40 to 87, something on that, a huge gap, but I mean, millions of dollars per week.
Yeah.
Per week.
Yeah.
What the hell?
This is a felony. Under the law, this is material support for terrorism.
Yes, absolutely.
We sanction other countries for doing.
The State Department's doing it.
Yeah.
The CIA's doing it.
Yeah.
USAID's doing it.
Yeah.
Tell me, how does this happen?
The Department of Homeland Security's doing it.
Oh, freaking A.
Think of all those weapons that Biden left behind in Afghanistan. They just didn't disappear. When I was in South America and Central America in the 1980s, there were these M16s that we were capturing from the communists, American M16s, but the serial numbers drilled out of them. And on some of them, we found the serial numbers, whoever sent them had forgotten to drill them out. The American media was reporting that they were capturing, the communists were capturing these from the Salvadoran army. Salvadoran army at the time didn't have M16s. So the serial numbers that were tracked from those weapons that had them, they were U.S. Marine shipment to Da Nang, South Vietnam in 1957, which meant the Vietnamese communist government sent them to the Soviet Union, which then sent them to Cuba or offshore on the Pacific coast to be delivered to the communist terrorists and guerrilla groups. So these weapons don't just go away when we leave them behind.
Sure, of course not. No, I know that some people have poo-pooed we left billions of dollars of materiel in Afghanistan, gave up Bagram Air Base, which nobody understands. Nobody understands that. And so I know, I sure don't anyway. However, they will, of course, sell these things, or they'll use them. They'll give them to their they'll sell them to their friends. They'll put them in the international trade, the arms trade, and then they'll upgrade. People say, well, they're probably outdated right now. Well, you know what? Not necessarily night vision stuff. That's not upgraded to. That's state of the art stuff, and we just gave it away. We just left it there. We left all the biometrics of all the people who were our friends, so that there was a kill list left. I mean, my God, come on, Michael. This is who does? Why are they trying to kill us? Why are they trying to kill us?
You mean the foreign terrorists or the people in our government?
No, our own country. What the hell are they doing?
Some of it's incompetence, but a lot of it is deliberate, and you have to wonder why.
Well, I wonder why. What do you think that is?
I think our counterintelligence has been so poor over the past decades that we don't pay much attention to who is compromising our people in the government, who is recruiting them for their own causes. So you have the controlled American officials and decision makers who are controlled by foreign intelligence services, either as agents or as assets. And then you have their dupes they're influenced by others who are controlled. But then you have this whole mentality of people. This comes from the whole DEI mentality that America's fundamentally a bad country, that founded by white supremacist slaveholder oppressors, and it was a white patriarchy that was being built, and we had to steal land from people of color in order to build this for ourselves, and it all has to be destroyed.
Yeah, the culture of warfare, to the victor go the spoils, all of those things just thrown out the window. Sorry, apologize. You suck, and you can't have this land. And by the way, if you do have this land, we're going to make sure that you tell everyone where you got this land back in 1654 or 17 whatever. I mean, it's kind of absurd. And you bring this up in your book. Big Intel, how the CIA and FBI went from Cold War heroes to deep state villains. You talk about, and one, I think it's an Army officer, asks you the question, how many of our troops have been killed and laid at the whatever of DEI, cultural revolutionary stuff. They're on the pyre as a result of our failure to treat bad guys like bad guys instead of minority groups.
Right. Yeah. Oppressed minority groups, so we have this guilt complex that's being forced on everybody that we're oppressive. We have to understand this side. We have to accept certain casualties for understanding. I mean, in our psychological operations that our military was using against the terrorists, they were forbidden to use the terrorists' own vocabulary against them, to flip it against them, because it might be offensive.
What?
Yeah, literally. I was insane. When I was working at Fort Bragg, I was told that flat out. You cannot use these words in your training.
Oh, wait, whoa. At Fort Bragg, you're telling them?
As a civilian for psychological operations, I'm working with the U.S. Special Forces, who are trained to go out and wipe these people off the face of the earth. But we cannot offend those people who we're going to wipe out.
You give a couple of examples in the book, where all the guys in the Emirates and all of the big leaders and the funders of terrorism throughout the Middle East, and of course the killers of Americans and American soldiers and innocents. These guys all they've got reports on them. They've got a jacket full of information that is compromised information about them, their little boys that they predate upon, their lovers from the Philippines with whom they meet at every opportunity when they can get away from the mullahs. All of these things, and tell people what happened with all that information.
Oh, it was expunged. There were even soldiers who, you're out there in the field in Afghanistan, and it's a part of the local, especially Pashtun culture, where the men sodomize young boys in order to, in their view, to keep their women clean. Yeah. So you're out there with this Pashtun group of allied guys against Al Qaeda, and they're off, 10 feet away from your tent, taking turns abusing this boy. So you report this to your commanding officer, and nothing is done. So then you will file a complaint. Those American soldiers got penalized for reporting that.
Yeah, I believe it. Friend of mine, our man in Fallujah, kept in touch with him over the years. I mean, he talked about the Chai Boys. That's what they were called. And they're little guys who brought them tea and many other things as well, as poor babies. And we're all just looking the other way. But they wouldn't use the information against them because it might make them feel uncomfortable. And it might get them forced out of their position of authority among their fellow terrorists.
Right. And the whole idea was because everything's on video and donkeys, goats, you name it. There's video of all of this. And there was a lot earlier in the war, these soldiers would put it up on YouTube. They're looking at their night vision or their infrared or whatever.
I've seen one of those. Ooh.
Those videos. And I had a website called donkeyjihad.com.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, is it still there?
Yeah. Yeah, well, no. It was YouTube pulled down the videos, and I didn't think to at that time. I didn't think to download the videos, but I was told by my USAID, my Defense Department contracting group, if you want to continue to do this, you can't have a site like that. But I would have kept the site and not done that work just out of principle. But YouTube pulled the videos down. Made
it sort of obviated the problem there.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've
it
really
made bestiality look bad. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. They just wanted to make bestiality great again, I guess. But you didn't want to. Your videos would have made them look bad. That's terrible, Michael.
Well, and the folks out there, they're like good rural people in America. They have really gross, fun senses of humor, and they love it. So if you make these commanders objects of ridicule by like the Americans have been watching, and some of them were even posting videos of their rivals doing and then dressing up as women. Especially Taliban loves to dress up as women, and you put those things up, and you can just have them make fun of each other, and they'll have death feuds for generations over this. So that's the kind of fighting that you do to get the enemy to fight each other and to destroy themselves. But that wasn't allowed because it was offensive.
Yeah, it was offensive. And then all of a sudden they ran an offensive against our people. And you have dead people at the pyre, at the pyre of political correctness. Unbelievable. You talk about in your book, Big Intel, about ways to rope in some of these intel agencies who don't really seem to do a lot for us. I will say this on the CIA. We talked to Sam Faddis, who is a former CIA agent. I know you know each other, and one of the things he said was, and that you acknowledge in your book, is that there's very little human intelligence that goes on for the CIA. They're disseminated throughout the embassies, and they get stuff from other Five Eyes countries, and we rely upon their human intelligence and never do anything for ourselves, or very little of it. Indeed, Sam, one time when I spoke with him on the podcast, he said, we had no spies at the Wuhan lab. How do you not have a guy in the Wuhan lab so that the CIA can at some point in the future say, yes, it emanated from the Wuhan lab. And now we've got the CIA going, we're not really sure about that. I mean, whatever.
And you've got USAID funding the Wuhan lab. Now, as stupid as that whole thing was, imagine that there might have been a virtuous side to it where they were using that money to insert CIA spies into the Wuhan lab. You can kind of understand that, but then you wouldn't allow a pandemic to break out to kill so many of our people and destroy our economy.
Yeah. Do we know why that happened? Why we allowed a pandemic to escape from that lab? I mean, is there some sort of reason that you can come up with that would be I don't know. I mean, I realize this is in the airy-fairy conspiracy theory area, but they did it. They hid it. We paid for it. there's an end game here. What is it?
It could be a whole lot of things that sound reasonable that get to your tinfoil hat part, but it's still, somebody has to ask the questions. So you have some people who are just pure scientists and all they want to do is science and all they can think of is science. So they've got this tunnel vision for doing science. And then they persuade other people it's not allowed in the United States or there's too many regulations. Let's do it in China where it's allowed. And somebody says, sounds good. Let's give it a try. Let's try to find some vaccine against some bat virus or something. And so I can understand them wanting to do that because they don't understand the geopolitical reasons for that. And then other ones who are in the pocket of the Chinese. They will do what the Communist Party of China wants. It's very lucrative. It's very profitable. It's so you have that end of it. Then you have people who are working for Communist China, both the Chinese citizens who come here to our med schools and to our universities to become techies and so forth. They do all this research here. They learn how to do it. They steal our technology and our discoveries, and they bring it back to China. And then you have those people, when you're a Chinese national and you travel to a foreign country, you must do what the Chinese Communist Party wants you to do because your family's back home. So you have to. But imagine you have at the Boston area. Boston's a terrible center for this, for the medical area, and then Silicon Valley on the digital side. A lot of Chinese spies have infiltrated that at the college age level and above. And over the years, they become senior, but they build friendships and relationships and business relationships with the Americans they knew the whole time. For the Americans, it's normal. And so, yeah, come on out to the lab. So we don't know how that happened. But the other part is when that virus broke out in Wuhan in late 2019, early 2020, who did the Chinese government put in charge of the lab?
The bat lady?
A 3-star general who was head of China's biological warfare program.
Not the bat lady.
Lady,
yeah, because it was part of it was run by the military, the Chinese military, right? This is a military grade lab, right? This was
military grade lab. Yes. Yeah. But now you've got a 3-star, we don't have a biological warfare program, let alone a 3-star general. That's huge. That's a huge piece of a military force to reach 3 stars. But so that general, female general, her MOS was biological warfare. So, whoa, you've got the Chinese biological warfare military taking over the lab and the investigation. And then you have no public acknowledgement of this for a few weeks until Xi Jinping is fully briefed and the party makes a policy statement. Finally, it's authorized for them to talk about it and admit that there's a problem, while the World Health Organization is echoing everything the Chinese government says. And our CIA can't figure out where it originated from.
Which brings us back to how you want to dismantle the CIA. Please tell us, how the hell did fix this place?
We need an intelligence service. We need to collect secret intelligence around the world that no one wants our leadership to know in other countries, so that we can inform our president and his designees on what's really happening in the world and what's likely to happen in the world. That's vital. That's what, if you're investing money, you want financial advisors who study the world this way and who have privileged information this way and who give you information so you can do your financial planning. On the national level, every president needs this. We need it for our diplomacy, for our military planning, for everything. You need to have a foreign counterintelligence service to combat foreign attempts to infiltrate your intelligence services. You need a great analytical crew to analyze these things, but you don't, and you need to be able to run covert operations where it's in the national interests for us to do so, and therefore not have to send military force.
Like at Wuhan.
But you at least need to know that they're making viruses there, right? So,
yeah.
So
of course, we could have asked Fauci. He would have been able to answer that question, but
exactly.
He was busy lying to Congress about it.
Exactly. The highest paid person in the U.S. government making huge money off the. And that's another thing. If you're a federal government contractor and you invent things on contract with the government, you get to keep the patent. The taxpayer doesn't share in the wealth from the patents you invent.
Oh, I thought we shared it. We don't? They get the whole thing?
No.
Shinola.
Yeah,
wow.
At least with the Defense Department, I knew because I know a lot of defense contractors who made their own patents, and that's how they became wealthy. But I said, don't you have to share this with the taxpayer? No, under the contract we develop, they need the product. They need the contractor to develop the product or the process. And in so doing, in developing it and providing that service, the developers can keep the patents. But anyway, so imagine these medical patents and all the money that's at stake there. And now so much of our pharmaceutical industry is based in China. So you got to get back to your question on Wuhan, all of these, no, we've gone off on a few different areas now.
Yeah, we have. Just go where you want to go.
Who's motivated? There are so many really innocent, naive, purely scientific, greedy, or treasonous motivations that factor into all of this Chinese virus pandemic. That one of the clues, one of the tells was when CIA Director John Brennan under Biden offered the CIA analysts who had concluded that the virus did originate at the Wuhan lab, offered them a large annual bonus to change their conclusions. Now, why would the director of the CIA do that?
I don't know. Aren't you glad he doesn't have his classification, his whatever?
Yeah. And really, why his clearance wasn't pulled in the last Trump administration, is another question. But they weren't organized then, and they were, they came in as a mess. Now, this group that came in with President Trump that he's put together is astonishing. They've been working on this for since last spring. A lot of these people have to put the executive orders together and to put the crews together and to vet people to come in. So they're really coming in like a machine, and we see what can happen when they're well prepared. But back to your CIA question about what to do with it. Because we need all these capabilities. But the CIA, like any bureaucracy, has become so bloated, so full of lazy people, useless people, privileged people who don't think they should have to work too hard, naive people, politicized people, resentful people, none of whom make professional intelligence officers. If you look at a lot of the analysis that comes out of the CIA, some of it's really great. But you can tell because either it's been declassified or it's been leaked to the favorite CIA influence outfits like the New York Times and the Washington Post and NBC and so forth. A lot of it's just sloppy, terrible analysis. And a lot of my graduate students had gone into the CIA as analysts, and some of them were first rate. Some of them were terrible, but they got hired anyway. And I mean, as a sign of this, the CIA assessments of the Russian intentions and capabilities to invade Ukraine was that Kiev could be taken in 24 to 72 hours.
Yeah, remember that one. Whatever happened to that?
Criminal negligence. All they were doing was they were spying on the Russian military chain of command that was lying to each other up the ranks about their capabilities, and they lied to Putin. So they were eavesdropping on all of this, and they called this intelligence rather than say, well, they can't really invade because they have all these other deficiencies that won't allow a rapid victory like that. And then it was that intelligence that prompted the Biden team to withdraw our embassy from Kiev and tell other embassies to leave Kiev, to make Kiev a free fire zone for Putin's forces. And that provocative weakness actually encouraged Putin to invade Ukraine. This is why it's so vital to have first-rate intelligence that's nonpartisan, that's just telling the way it is. And you'll have different people with different views combine those different views to say, well, we have a high degree of confidence of this, but two of our analysts have a high degree of confidence of a different thing, and then others have a lower degree of confidence. And that's what you need as a decision maker. It's really deteriorated. So what I would do is the CIA is roughly 30,000 people so far. And only about 1,500 of them are in the clandestine service. That's the people abroad doing covert operations.
And the other ones are reading open source newspapers and providing reports on
a lot of them are. Yeah. Oh, anything online they're using and they're calling it intelligence.
And classifying it.
Yeah, obviously. But also a lot is devoted to gender espionage and climate spying. I mean,
what?
Stupid stuff. Yeah. Oh, so much of it's on gender. And what's the status of gender rights in Uganda? This literally, you're writing reports on this. So the State Department could put sanctions on Uganda. Not a joke, not an exaggeration. So that's how silly it's got. Then you've got wasted resources. You've got counterproductive and damaging resources. So if you just took it and you shrunk it down to make it an elite service again, and you shrunk it, the clandestine service, say from 1,500. So I said I was actually in in a conversation with a whole lot of recently retired CIA station chiefs. And I said, if you just cut the clandestine service by a third to 500 people, you'd have a much better capability. And they all looked at each other and they kind of chuckled. And then one of them said, take a zero off that. And they all agreed. If we had a clandestine service of 50 agents abroad, just 50 who were first rate, we wouldn't need the other 1,450.
And those are spies. Those are like real spies.
Yeah, those are the ones who are undercover as spies. They're not foreigners who we recruit. They're American citizens. So that's how dire our situation is right now. So as you mentioned before, we rely on the locals or on our allies, the British, the Canadians. The French are really excellent, and they're very helpful to us a lot of the time. But they won't tell us everything because they have their own interests to protect as well.
Sure.
But if you want to know what's going on in Egypt, CIA has to go to the Egyptian secret police to figure things out.
Oh, yeah, they've been so helpful and forthcoming in the past.
Yeah. The Egyptians knew that Obama was trying to overthrow their government with the USAID, color revolution, and that Trump didn't fire those people, and then Biden brought them back. So why would the Egyptians tell us anything at all except mislead us, or unless it suited their purposes? So you have this all around the world where it's called liaison relationships. They're important to have, but we can't rely on them the way we do. That's not a real intelligence service, especially for a country like ours.
Wow. So if you just were able to use the money, or at least some of the money that is used to get newspaper readers to stop writing reports, and we just get rid of those guys who riff those dudes, and then we spend more money for human intelligence, i.e. our own agents, that would be money better spent, right?
Sure. And then also you have so much greater computing capacity now. Look how we're all using AI instead of Google now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Grok and Perplexity and so forth.
Sure. Love Perplexity.
Yeah. So they footnote everything. It's really handy.
I love that. It's so helpful as a reporter. You go, oh, here's all the stories about that. It's just amazing. Yeah. I don't use the verbatim, but I do look at where they're getting the stories and the information.
I mean, search engines are just garbage now for the most part. But
what is?
Like Google and Brave and these others, DuckDuckGo, they're giving junk responses to so many things, and they're burying a lot of great stuff. So you didn't have that computing power before for the intelligence community. But now that we do, we're not getting rid of the substandard personnel who are no longer needed because they've been replaced by technology. So those have to be cut. But I would also separate the intelligence collection and analytical side from the clandestine service covert operation side, and have a separate intelligence agency so they can't commingle things. And then you're cutting the power of a central CIA to run operations. And you have a much more robust, much more elite, much more aggressive foreign operations service and clandestine service than what we would have right now.
Yeah. Oh, we need a bunch of Mitch Rapps, door kickers. That's what we need. I mean, some smart ones. Do you like Vince Flynn books by any chance? Do you? No, you don't. Who's your favorite? You've lived this stuff, obviously, but do you have a favorite spy thriller genre or author that you follow?
No, I don't like any of them because it's all fake.
Oh yeah, okay. You know too much.
Perfect, and everybody's a perfect physical specimen.
Sure.
There's no midget hero. There's no autist hero.
Hey, that was a Brad Thor remark. I love that character. Keep going. I'm sorry.
No, but there are no. I mean, these are not James Bond phoniness. It's real human beings of every imaginable. I don't want to talk like Mr. DEI, but if you want real creativity, you get people. And like heroes, they shouldn't be these idealized figures that are unbelievable because it's not reality. Some of the best spies I've met are really boring people, homely people you'd never guess. And that's the best spy. Like that fat, quiet guy in the corner there who just looks like a complete loser is actually the most devious, brilliant person working for us or working for the enemy. Who knows? But so you don't have a realist talent like that anymore. I suppose Tom Clancy and his books were good. They were good thrillers. They were believable. Others, Brad Thor uses a lot of really great tradecraft and so forth. But I think his writing is really lame, but his storytelling is really good. And I've never read him, but my wife was listening to his book while I was doing some construction work, and I said, "That is the lamest writing I've why are you even listening to that junk? But then I started listening, and it was a really good story. But so the best stories are nonfiction.
It's true.
And there's a lot of nonfiction.
Look what we're looking at right now. Before I know, I don't want to run out of time with you, and I'm so appreciative of your time. Let's talk about the FBI and how you would just, I mean, this has been among the most traitorous individuals in the U.S. government against the people of of America than has happened that I can ever recall. And I'm sure you could recall another instance where it might be close, but this has been pretty bad how the FBI has been used to turn against the American people and use us as their intelligence targets. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Again, like the CIA, we need most of the functions that the FBI performs. But we don't need the FBI anymore. It's an obsolete organization. It has become too powerful. It's a brand that's sort of bulletproof if you try to do anything with it. And it's become really substandard, although there are a lot of really great and talented people in there who we really need. So I think the FBI has run its course. And this is the part of the fault of every president and Congress going back a half century. There hasn't been a solid oversight hearing of the FBI in 49 years. And before that, you had J. Edgar Hoover running what was the Bureau for 48 years, and there was never any challenging of him. So for a century, you've had almost no oversight of the FBI. So
Kash
again,
Patel help, right?
well, like USAID or anything else, they're just going to grow and do what they do. So Kash goes in. What you need, this is why he's such an ideal pick as FBI director. You can't have some polite Washington insider lawyer who does the revolving door to do government service and then go to a law firm and make partner and make $10 million and then go back to serve as director of an agency or something, because you need to keep your friends and your equities and your opportunities. Kash Patel doesn't care about that. He just wants to do his job. So he's aggressive. He is focused. He's fearless, and he has experience doing these things. He was one of the guys who exposed Russiagate when people wouldn't listen. So he's got all of the right factors there, and he's got a great support system, including people inside the FBI who have not come to the surface yet, who are eager to be helping him. What I would hope he does, I know he has made some statements, and in his book, Government Gangsters, he talked about this, how the FBI, certain functions have to be taken out of the FBI has to be downsized, and then he said publicly the Hoover headquarters building should be turned into a museum. That was more a metaphorical statement, but he's there. He understands the problem. But there you cannot have what the FBI has become, which is a law enforcement agency, which abides by the law and works through the courts to make cases and to prosecute people, and as a law enforcement agency. But it's also a domestic intelligence agency, which doesn't meet any of those standards of evidence because it's spying, it's collecting intelligence, it's doing some things, it's getting intelligence sometimes often in ways that are not admissible in court. And it's using methods that don't include warrants that would be illegal on a law enforcement case. But if it's against a foreign national, it's okay to do. It's when they use it against American nationals that mixes it up. So it's really damaged itself. So it has to be split apart. Those functions have to be separated. So you take the law enforcement part and have a separate law enforcement organization. And you have then a separate domestic intelligence or a standing counterintelligence service that all they do is hunt down spies. And they're not doing it to arrest them and put them in jail. They're doing it to infiltrate their operations, take control of their operations, penetrate their masters in their foreign countries, and then disrupt those other countries' abilities to harm us. We don't have that capability, and we never did. But then you take the law enforcement part of it and you think, okay, let's take the regular federal law enforcement and take all the talent from that and the technology in that, move it over to the U.S. Marshals, which is our oldest law enforcement agency. George Washington founded it. It's had very few scandals in its life. It has a high public confidence, and it hasn't gone fully woke yet. Move that there and move the law enforcement training like the FBI Academy to the U.S. Marshals. Have your separate standing counterintelligence service. Move the firearms and explosive functions of the FBI Why do we need that and ATF? So let's move it all to ATF to just get it out of the FBI, deal with ATF later. The same thing with you don't need financial crimes investigated when you have other agencies doing it. So pull all that stuff out. And so by then, what do you have now? You just have the human resources and the residual DEI personnel left over, and just grind all that down and put the FBI itself in a museum.
You talking about? Oh, go ahead. Go.
No, you don't want to lose the functions, and you don't want to break the continuity. So really, if I was to advise Cash on something right now, first day in the FBI, tell everybody to stay home unless they're working on an emergency terrorism or spy case or somebody's in grave danger. Everybody else should just stay home and freeze all the funding until the director can get a grip on who's who and what's what. And that would prevent a counter coup type activity from taking place from within the Bureau.
Well, that brings me to what I wanted to ask you about. You talked about how we need to have people who can infiltrate the bad guys' operations, presumably foreign. But I mean, let's take a look at what the FBI has done in the past. In COINTELPRO, we've got, of course, the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys being infiltrated by the FBI, and January 6th happened. The Whitmer Fednapping happened, with more FBI assets involved in the fake kidnapping thing than the two guys who ended up going to prison for it. And so I see that's a problem that could easily be turned on the innocent Americans, like they've already done. What do you say?
Yeah. Well, the perpetrators behind a lot of these need to be arrested. There need to be criminal cases brought against them. And if they meet the legal standard for prosecution, they should be prosecuted, and we shouldn't go easy on them.
Like Tom D'Agostino, that dude?
Yeah, those guys. And there are several. But first, if it's the federal law enforcement agency that's committing felonies, as a matter of course, that has to stop. You're not going to have public confidence again until the perpetrators are prosecuted, convicted, and imprisoned.
Can you explain to me? And I've not been able to figure this out. I want to go through the transcripts of the Proud Boys cases, for example, through January 6th. These guys were all on literal speed dial with the FBI and DHS and other intelligence agencies that are domestic intelligence agencies through whoever, and on January 6th. And they're texting where they are and what's going on. Why did they get the worst punishment when they were actually assets of the feds? Explain this to me.
Yeah, I don't know for a fact, but I think part of it is to hide the fact that they were assets to the feds.
Yeah, but 22 years for Enrique Tarrio, and he was not even there?
Yeah,
come on, man.
That was the jury and the court. That wasn't even the FBI and the Justice Department. That, although they might have said throw the book at him, we don't know what else happened. If he was indeed, as it was reported, an FBI asset, and he wasn't doing everything they wanted to, they might have said, you know what, we're gonna screw you. So they can play hardball, but it's really his handlers who are to blame, because when the FBI has a relationship with a confidential human source, a CHS, it's a relationship. So they can say, thanks for telling us about these plans. We advise you, just don't do it. It's a bad thing to do. Your guys are going to get busted. You might even get busted. They didn't say that. They were in a position to say that. And so the Bureau had these assets in place, which we don't know for a fact whether or not they were controlled, but we do know they could have been in a position to say, we're going to stop you before you get there.
Yeah, that'd be nice.
To do it. And they did nothing like that.
Kind of makes you want to go back to all those poor, maybe some of them were, obviously bad actors, but, I'm thinking of the Christmas tree bomber in Portland, Oregon. And I went to that trial in federal court all the time. And I was thinking, I believed everything that the CHS said. I believed everything the FBI said. And I'm wondering, I don't know now. I'm kind of wondering if the FBI didn't cajole that kid into doing whatever to blow up the Christmas tree and kill people on December 10th and whatever, 2009 or whatever it was. Don't you want to do over some of those cases?
Absolutely. Because what you see is a pattern over time. The FBI is really exploiting naive, mentally disturbed, emotionally disturbed otherwise desperate people. It's not really going after, who's energizing them, who's motivating them, who's paying for things to enable them to do what they do. What are those networks? They're not going after the big ones. They're just going after the small ones.
Yeah. You were there on January 6th. You weren't an activist in any way. You just went and watched the president's speech and then walked up from the speech. And can you tell a little bit about that? Because you were convinced this was some sort of active measures thing. This was an operation of sorts, a governmental operation.
Yeah. So I live on Capitol Hill. So the Capitol is my neighborhood. And I used to work in the House and Senate. So I know how things work. And I know I've worked with the Capitol Police before. So you just, as a local, this stuff. People from out of town obviously wouldn't know these things. But so you knew what looked out of place, what was right and what was wrong. So when we went, we almost didn't go to the rally because it was just one more thing. And I've been to lots of rallies, both conservative America First type rallies, since the 70s when I was an anti-nuclear activist. So I've been to left and right events, and sometimes to infiltrate and disrupt the leftist groups on my own, not as a government asset. But I had gotten training in the 1970s in high school by radicals who I was in the anti-nuclear movement because I didn't want a nuclear plant in my state. It was just because for environmental reasons, and I'm a nature lover, so I love living out in the countryside. And so I was afraid of an accident like that. And when they brought me in as a high school kid, I volunteered, but then they're looking at kids who has leadership potential or who can organize or who's a communicator and who's just really, really stupid and can be induced to do dumb things. And because it's always the kids who get put in the front. And so I was trained in that, go up the marshes in a canoe with bolt cutters and spray paint and cut through the fence and spray slogans on the containment dome, that's what I was trained to do. I ended up not doing it. But I got to recognize through that training how you mobilize rallies. And if they go violent, there is a certain signals structure and a command structure that one follows when one knows what to look for. So it was back then from the 70s that was inherent. And then over the years, again, living in DC all this time, you see a whole lot of rallies. And on this one, this was just MAGA people from around the country. It was normal Americans from toddlers to really old people in wheelchairs. And they're all going and they're all happy, respectful, even though the city didn't put out porta potties. There was only one set of porta potties, tens or hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, they weren't going in the bushes like the left wingers do. They weren't making messes of any kind. It was remarkable. And but we saw these groups of tight units go up, like sort of military tactical units. And they were wearing military type gear, most of them, and helmets and masks, and either COVID masks or full face masks. And what MAGA person is going to walk around with a COVID mask on, right? So they didn't really fit in, and they're just using it to cover their faces. And they were rude and they were pushing their way through, and they went up, and we were about 3 blocks behind where we would later learn Ray Epps was, just to give you an idea. So we were about 15, 20 minutes behind the first people. But going through, I had noticed that the hurricane fence had been taken down, and it was put around the Capitol because there was going to be a very sensitive vote in Congress to certify the elections. So both houses would be in session. So the American flag's over the Senate wing chamber and it's over the House chamber. So that's how you can tell from the outside which houses are in session. But there was no Capitol Police presence at all. There were no DC police presence at all down near the Capitol. There was no canine unit, which you would always have. And the hurricane fence was gone, but then the low, they call it bicycle rack fencing, had been put aside sort of perpendicular to the way it was blocked, like an open door, but it was put neatly aside, and only one of them had been knocked down. And with a crowd, that's not uncommon to see. But the biggest tell was the Capitol has an extensive loudspeaker system for warning of public dangers or crowd control or crowd dispersal. And we know this because we can hear it from our house when they do a drill every few months. It's unmistakable. That didn't go off that day. So I thought, it's really weird for everybody to be going up to the Capitol, but it's open. There's no keep out signs. There's no police presence. So we just went with the flow. But so did the organizers that I recognized come up. So when I saw them, they were standing on a stone at an end of a stone wall, one on each side. They looked like they had the demeanor of senior non-commissioned officer, like Vietnam vet kind of guys. They were older than me. And they were telling people to keep moving ahead and keep moving ahead. And at first it seemed like it's just a courtesy. Come on, there's a lot of people coming up behind you. But when the trouble started, they were saying, don't retreat, don't retreat. Some of them had earpieces on. They had different colored electrical tape on their shoulders or on the back of their hats or helmets, and they were signaling to each other, and some had radios. So you could recognize the command and control of all this. And the significant part of this is, or one of the significant parts, is that the whole narrative at that time, and for the next several days, the next week or more, was that Donald Trump incited a spontaneous insurrection against the Capitol. It was not spontaneous. It was planned. And to this day, nobody knows who did it, and no one has been named as a suspect as the ringleader.
And and one of the videos I saw in the movie, The War on Truth, was the signaling that occurred with red flares to at least connote, I suppose, for others, that the breach had happened. And the next thing you see is Ray Epps and his cadre being removed from the crowd. So it was just kind of...
They were extracted. Yeah. So that's the Capitol Police camera from the dome looking down onto the front line of the crowd. And you can see Ray Epps moving along from the right side across the fence to the left. And then a team comes in and extracts him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, if that guy's not a Fed of some sort, I don't even know what it means to not be a Fed. I mean, I don't get it at all. Right. So you are convinced that this was a government operation. We don't know who did it. Do you think that the pipe bomb thing was set as a diversion and they didn't need it because of the attack on the Capitol? Or how do you think that all played together?
We still don't know all of that. I know Steve Baker at The Blaze has followed this really closely. Steve and I became friends following this because we both posted our eyewitness. We were the first to post eyewitness accounts in detail. And we both did it the same day and found each other on Twitter then. And so we've been friends ever since. He's got this down to every last detail. What the curious thing was, those types of pipe bombs, they were both inert and they were both on old kitchen timers. Manual kitchen that only lasted an hour. They were taped to the kitchen timer. So if you're planting a bomb in advance, hours in advance, why would you have a 1 hour manual timer on it? But they're also the same kind of props that are used in training FBI and police bomb squads.
Oh, really? I guess I didn't know that.
Yeah. Oh. And to this day, they still can't find out. And they really never did make a big deal about finding out who done it.
They stopped investigating the minute that they got the phone number of the individual who was seen on his phone outside the DNC. That's what happened. Yeah. I think it was the DNC at that point.
Right. Yeah. So there's proof right there that there was official fakery and diversion at a very high level involved, because even planting an inert bomb like that is a felony.
Sure. Especially outside in the DNC case. I mean, what did they do? They moved Kamala Harris over there. When she was
vice president of the United States.
Vice president of the United States. Plus she was a senator too. So, I mean, she
so they moved. Also, it's in the perimeter. Both the Democrat National Committee and the Republican National Committee are within the U.S. Capitol Police perimeter. Mm-hmm. My house is in the U.S. Capitol Police perimeter. So, I mean, the Capitol Police have jurisdictional control over that area, as do the D.C. Police. So it could have been D.C. Police. It could have been Capitol Police. We simply don't know the facts yet.
Yeah, she almost died, supposedly, that day. She was almost assassinated by a pipe bomb. That went quiet pretty fast, didn't it? You'd think she'd milk that for all it was worth.
For all it's worth. I almost gave my life for this game. Well, she should, she can be demagogic when she can speak.
No, stop it.
I'm trying to think about it, but yeah.
Crazy. I mean, I just don't even understand why that didn't happen. But I guess the reason that they sort of put that on the QT was that there was other stuff going on. Their successful operation resulted in a breach of the Capitol, and that's really all they needed to stop the audit, which is what Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley were asking for at that moment, and they got that stopped.
And there's so much more to this, Victoria, because a good friend of mine, he's Ukrainian. He was a Ukrainian diplomat in Washington, and he exposed USAID and Hillary's corruption with USAID. This is years ago. And he exposed Burisma and Hunter Biden. He was one of the lead guys to expose it as a Ukrainian diplomat who was in on these meetings for the Ukrainian government with the Hillary people. So his name is Andrei Telezhenko. And then he realized what he's doing is really messed up and it was wrong. And so he came forward as a whistleblower to Senator Ron Johnson and Senator Chuck Grassley, and provided his eyewitness testimony, gave a lot of press interviews, talked to the FBI, talked to everybody else. And he was sanctioned as a Russian spy in the last days of the first Trump administration. And what had happened was people at the Treasury Department who were Biden loyalists threw him in a list of real Russian agents, threw his name in to call him a Russian agent so that it would be thrown upstairs in the very busy last days of the Trump administration so the Treasury and the State Department would sign off to sanction him as a Russian spy. And the people who signed it didn't know what they were doing. It was just a pile of paperwork that they signed each one. And the poor guy has been unable to live he was on a kill list back in Ukraine. He went to refuge in 2 other countries, and the U.S. pressured those countries to push him out because of Russian agent. He's able to live in yet another country, but his parents live in the United States. He's not free to move anywhere, and he's not even free to have employment anywhere on earth that respects U.S. sanctions. So he was smeared by this machine because why? Because he came out supporting Donald Trump with the proof to show that Hunter Biden was involved in these corrupt deals and that USAID and Hillary were involved with a whole lot of other groups. Now, the other key point to this was he was chief of security during the 2014 Maidan color revolution in Ukraine. He knows how all of these things worked. And one time he and I went out just north of the White House by Lafayette Park at what is now a Black Lives Matter Plaza, right in front of the fancy hotels. And AFL-CIO headquarters is there. It's like an 8 or 10-story building with a 360-degree view of the area. So we were standing there, and I said, this plaza looks, because this was right where the big BLM riots were, where they tried to storm the White House, and Trump had to go down to the bunker. Remember that time?
Oh, I do.
All those Secret Service were attacked and wounded.
Yep.
And nobody talks about that anymore.
No, nobody went to jail for it either.
Yeah. So anyway, he was telling me that as an organizer and the security guy of color revolutions, you would use the AFL-CIO building as your command and control because it has full 360-degree view of everything. It can shelter a lot of people. It can house the communications equipment, and it can see everything that's going on. He said that's what he would do if he was to stage a color revolution against the American government. And then he was also describing what he learned from USAID organizers, how to populate agents and a command and control system within a crowd to influence and shape crowd mentality. Because, when people get in crowds, they'll just go to an event and they might go just to show their support, but they get riled up and then they start losing their independence, their own personal logic. And you do things you ordinarily wouldn't do in a crowd, like at a really good rock concert. You just do stupid stuff. So you can channel that. When people lose their sense of independence, you can channel that if you have people who are organized to do that. This is what he was describing that was done in the color revolution that he learned from USAID that would logically be applied to a group of tens of thousands who wanted to storm the White House or later storm the Capitol.
So in the War on Truth, there's a discussion about a Ukraine color revolution expert. That's who they're talking about, right?
Yeah, his name is Andrei Telezhenko.
So they were really, that's what this was. This was an attempt at a coup. He was already gone out of office, but what would the purpose of that be besides?
What, the Capitol one?
Yeah.
Well, who stages a coup without weapons?
Right.
right? And you look at the guys who went into the Senate chamber, QAnon man or whatever his name was, dressed in the wolf cloak. He just kind of walked in, and the Capitol Police said, you can see them on video saying, "Hey, don't touch that, or be careful of that," And they said, "Okay."
Well, they escort him. Didn't they escort him?
He get to sit in the chair, the vice president's chair, or the presiding officer of the Senate's chair, and he speechified for a bit. And the guys who got in trouble were the ones who were damaging property by leaping off the gallery up top. But really, that's not how you stage a coup. That's just how you do disruptive things.
As always, J. Michael Waller, author of Big Intel, Center for Security Policy, the good guys. It's been eye-opening. I've read your book a couple of times. This whole thing, what's going on right now, is just been, well, how do you characterize what's going on right now that we're finding out about our own government working against Donald Trump and the people? How do you characterize that? What is that?
It's a revelation that we really need if we're to be whole as a country again, because you can see how Obama had set it up, but Biden's team was really implementing. They were building a one-party regime where they were manipulating elections. They were using electoral fraud. They were blocking any attempts to stop this. They were using huge multi-billion-dollar slush funds intended to help the poor to finance all of this and to make themselves rich at the same time. They took over the FBI and the CIA and the other intelligence services, and they were using elements of that, part for political cronyism, part for getting rich on their own, and part for political control. They were working with FBI and big tech to censor us. Think of what happened to Parler. Think of how Twitter and Facebook were censoring people, and they were doing it at the request of the FBI or the White House. So this all had to be exposed. And it started with the Twitter files. When Elon Musk bought Twitter and provided those files, it opened everything up for people to see. So he's an architect of this now in the Trump administration. He's opening up files for everybody to see. He's opening up records for everybody to see so that things cannot be hidden. Now, you have to be careful in times like this not to reveal stuff that legitimately should be secret, so our enemies don't know certain of our capabilities or our assets or our vulnerabilities. But I mean, you can see the pattern here, and then he's planning to have Trump fire huge numbers of people in order to make the government run more efficiently and effectively and at a smaller scale to everyone's benefit, except for those who are on the take. He fired 5,000 employees, 6,500 employees, huge number of employees at Twitter, let only 1,500 stay, and he built a much better product out of it. So, and look at his other businesses. So people shouldn't be surprised at what's happening, but it's really a miracle to be alive at this time when a man like Donald Trump and a man like Elon Musk and the people who they're bringing in around them who really want to fight to save our country, and they're doing it against all odds, and they know they're on kill lists, and they just don't care. They're doing it anyway.
The end. Thanks for coming on. Crazy.
Good to see you, Victoria.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Adult in the Room podcast. To keep the programs you like to listen to, please rate this podcast with a fantastic 5 stars on your Apple Podcast app every time you listen, and give me a great review. Plus, of course, subscribe to the podcast. It makes a difference with the big tech algorithm and the big tech oligarchs, and it makes us easier to find. Please get in touch with me on all the big tech stuff. Yeah, we're still there. Using the names Victoria Taft or the Adult in the Room podcast on MeWe, Parler, Minds, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thanks to 1A Cast for imaging, editing, and production. The fantastic song is Gospel by the March 4th Band of Portland, Oregon. Music for Antifa versus Mike Strickland is Ride or Die by Raps by RC. The Adult in the Room podcast is also a production of Flamingo Road Studios. Remember, head up, heart out, and strive to be the adult in the room. Till next time, mischief managed.